elections, data, and technology. And to moderate this session for us is Steph Muchai. She is the Director of Partnerships at the International Lawyers Project. She is also a member of the Open Government Partnership Global Steering Committee. As head of partnership, she is able to support transparent and accountable governments, a robust and enabling online and offline civic space, and also to access justice and community partnership. How about that? Steph also provides technical expertise to policy and decision makers, non-state actors, and has been engaged in a raft of public interest interventions. She was also one of the lead co-drafters of the African Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms. And also one thing that we also need to mention is that she is a mentor and she leads Lapid Leaders Africa. This is an initiative that she currently leads to offer mentorship to young people. And also one thing that we also need to mention is that Steph is afraid of cats. That goes to the panelists that are there. Kindly let's ensure that there is no cat that is going to pass through the table, because Steph is not a fan of cats. Thank you once again, and over to you, Steph, as you moderate this particular session. Thank you and welcome.
Cat lovers and dog lovers alike. You are joining the first day of the Kenya Internet Governance Forum. We are on the second part of the day. If you're just joining us, welcome. If you have been with us, thank you for tracking all along. We're getting into an exciting and topical topic for Kenya at the moment, which is looking at data and elections. And to help me have this discussion, I have a great group of panelists who are with us today. Let's head over to our panelists now. Welcome to our panel. There are their beautiful faces. I wish you could give us a nice Kenyan smile. You all look very serious. Karibuni. I will start off with Fiona. Fiona, thank you for joining us today. Fiona is the CEO at Technology Service Providers Association of Kenya, otherwise known as TESPOC, and she leads the team there in ICT policy, regulation, research, and identifying ICT best practices. Welcome, Fiona, and you're the perfect person to kick us off with my first question. What we would like to start by talking about is identifying what kind of technology challenges should we anticipate in the upcoming elections. Karibu, Fiona. Fiona, if you could unmute your mic, please.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation. And thank you for getting us onto this panel. You've asked a very interesting question on what should we anticipate as challenges in terms of the upcoming election. I think given where I sit at TESPOC and being that 90% of our membership are infrastructure owners, I would start by saying that the biggest challenge we have right now today that we are facing is in infrastructure deployment. With all the construction that is going on across the country of both roads and railway infrastructure, there's been, and basically urbanization within the different counties, there's been a lot of infrastructure disruptions. And we've also been hit hard in the last 3 years by ICT infrastructure vandalism that is affecting our ability to just keep our customers connected. So I would say the number one challenge that we're going to face as a country when it comes to dealing with election technology is going to be infrastructure protection and security of the infrastructure to be able to ensure that all the centers that need to be connected are connected. Then there's also, of course, the issue of the security of this infrastructure. We don't seem to have a legal framework to protect ICT infrastructure, so that becomes a challenge that has to be dealt with. And because of that, it means that we need to find a way of making sure that we can quickly ensure we have alternate routes for any communication, any election communication that needs to be handled over the infrastructure. it's normally assumed that the ISPs are there, the carriers are there, and therefore the infrastructure is there. But that was easier in the previous elections when we didn't have as much vandalism as we have today on our ICT infrastructure. And I think the biggest challenge is probably going to be on the choice of technology that IEBC decide to use and to the level to which our infrastructure can support that, because we still don't know what decisions IEBC has made in terms of choice of technology and use of that technology. So once we know that, we'll be able to better identify the challenges and possibly advise on what would work with the existing infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Fiona. I will now ask the same question to our second panelist, who is Mwenda Tevin Gitonga. He is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He is a data policy associate at the Kenya ICT Action Network, our host for this event, and he is also a youth policy maker. Mwenda, I'll ask you the same question, but with a small twist. Fiona talked about the technology challenges. I would like you to tell us what data challenges can we anticipate in the upcoming election. Karibu.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And so I'm going to explain the challenges in relation to the election cycle. And this election cycle provided by the IEBC when it comes to their training manual. And now the challenges are to anticipate in each step of the cycle. So the first one is starting with the legal framework. So when you look at the current legal framework, we'll start from the Constitution of Kenya. IEBC uses should be one that, in terms of voting, should be one that is transparent, secure, that is accountable and verifiable. And with that in mind, now we have the Election Act 2011 that introduced the information technology when it comes to voting. Then the Election Amendment Act of 2016 that introduced the use of biometric system, the use of relaying election results using technology, verification of results using technology. And then it was called the Integrated Electoral Election System, which is a mouthful. And then from there we have the IEBC Election Technology Regulations of 2017, and the regulations just highlight how the IEBC uses technology in terms of when it comes to elections. But what you see in terms of the regulations and the act is they were before the Data Protection Act 2019, and up to now they're yet to be updated to reflect the Data Protection Act. For example, how they define biometric in the Data Protection Act is different from how IEBC defined it in the regulations. How they define data is different. The regulations don't cater for some things like, let's say, privacy by design when it comes to procurement technology. So that's the first challenge is in the legal framework. The second challenge is still following the cycle, it's planning and implementation. Under planning, IEBC is required, this is the point where they procure technology. So now, when it comes to the procuring of technology, the challenge that arises now is whatever technology they are procuring for elections, for the biometric voter registration, for verifying voters' identities, for relaying of messages, are they in line with the Data Protection Act, even when they're sending out the procurement requirements? Have they considered the use of that in terms of requirements that they have? One of them should be compliance with Data Protection Act. Let's say like you have things like privacy by design when it comes to whatever technology you use. The third step in the cycle is training and education. So this is training both to voters and training to the IEBC officials who are handling data. So now the challenge that arises there is IEBC officials that will be handling data need to be trained on data protection, and even voters themselves need to be trained on their rights under the Data Protection Act. So those include rights to be informed of how their data is being used, the right to rectify their data, right to object against it being processed, right to request for deletion. So that's we need to start training voters on those rights. The fourth thing in the cycle is registration and nomination. And the registration, that's when we have the biometric voter registration that IEBC uses. Another challenge is that system, is it complying with the Data Protection Act? Because biometric data is considered as sensitive data under the DPA. And if it's sensitive data, it needs to comply with the data protection principles. And since it's also sensitive data that really touches on the rights of people, in this case, their right to vote, which is quite sensitive in Kenya, you need to conduct a data protection impact assessment. So the question is, IEBC is about to start about mass voter registration next year. Have they complied with Have they done a DPI, for example? The fifth thing we look at is electoral campaign, and that's basically political parties campaigning for the elections. And remember in 2017, we had the Cambridge Analytica scandal. We still had a report done by CPIT that showed that people were receiving messages to go vote. And then even this year during the BBI campaign, the recently concluded BBI, for lack of a better word, shenanigans, we saw a report done by Mozilla where we were seeing active disinformation being targeted to people like judges, civil society, who are against the BBI. So that's already showing you a clear example of what to expect next year when it comes to political campaigns and the misuse of data. So that's a challenge that comes in. In terms of the sixth part of the cycle is voter operations and election day. So this is where they verify your data. And in 2017, the challenge that arose was the system failed. And now, since we have the Data Protection Act in place, and since they're collecting data, that's an example of misuse of data, because if the system fails next year, that means you collected my data, but you're not using it as required, because you're collecting it to verify that I'm indeed a voter for this area. So that's a challenge that comes in. The seventh thing that comes in is in terms of the cycle is the verification of the results. So 2017, we had a challenge of where the system that was being used to relay messages failed. Then the argument started that the system was hacked, that where the data was being stored couldn't be accessed with the servers. And now, coming the Data Protection Act, you see some of those things are required in case the system fails that you're using, you're required to report to the Data Protection Commission as well, like what has happened to the system that's failing? Has it been hacked or something like that? In terms of storing of data, the commissioner was speaking, I think, a month ago, where they said this time the data will be stored in Kenya. And actually, the proposed data protection general regulations also saying that data for Kenyan elections and its backup should be stored in Kenya. And I think one of the reasons for that is in case of anything that happens, let's say, like what we saw in 2017, someone can easily be able to access the data. Yeah, so those are some of the challenges you can see in relation to the cycle.
Thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive response. I pick a thread between you and Fiona where you both highlight some alarm at the fact that we don't know what technology is going to be used, and they're a year to the elections. And just to highlight for anyone that might be joining us and was not there in the morning, we do have a Data Protection Act in Kenya now, and our data should be protected. But that takes us now to the question of privacy. And to help us have this conversation, I'd like to invite Mule Musau. He is a leadership consultant, and he has a special interest in elections and ethics governance. Thank you for joining us today, Mule. My question for you is around how voters' privacy can be secured in the election, and if we have any breaches of our privacy, what remedies can we or should we look forward to? Because there's so much data collection and transfer happening with IEBC, political parties, and so forth. So please talk to us through some privacy and remedies for that. Karibu.
Thank you for having me. I will also speak as an election observer because I work for the Elections Observation Group. Just to highlight a few challenges which have already been mentioned by the other panelists, quickly, based on our observations, I mean, one of the things which has come out very clearly is that there's been a consistent, in terms of technology, consistent kit failure, which we are yet to address since the advent of the use of elections technology in our elections. So that's a major issue. And I think most of the other issues have been mentioned. The questions about data privacy are a big concern, especially now that big data, we have combined two things. One is we are now operating in a digital space where we are conducting a public process like an election. An election requires that the level of sovereignty of the country. We can see hacking and we can see interferences coming not just from within, but even from without. So the challenges are not very easy, are not very light in the scope of things as we have it at the moment. But one of the issues that we've been trying to pick with the authorities is a question of first having a hard and fast legal framework. We know that the Act, of course, is there. It has come in place because of a lot of robust engagements between different stakeholders. But the biggest problem in our country has not been the question of whether we have laws in place or whether we have a framework, a regulatory framework in place. The big problem has been, do we adhere to that legal framework? So the question that has been raised even by Tevin when he was talking about what IBC is required to do and what they need to apply in terms of addressing questions about privacy, that becomes a concern. We have the laws, yes, but we have a code of practice for the IEBC in terms of how they manage the data that they're collecting, especially through voter registration, the BVR kits. There is a lot of sensitive data which is being contained within that. And then we did also the political parties, and the case has been cited in regard to what the political parties were able to do in terms of people finding themselves in different political parties. 2017, we all know what happened again. Strathmore did a report on the fact that there looked like there was some breach. So how do we address this? How to address these breaches in light of the fact that there's impunity in our country and that authorities are not doing what they're supposed to do becomes a big issue. And for me, the best way to go about it is continue on two fronts. One, a very active advocacy campaign which must continue being carried out by all stakeholders who are involved. And secondly, a very robust public education so that people know their rights in terms of what ought to go out there, what ought to be shared, opt-in, opt-out options when it comes to engagement or the sharing of the data that is being given to the different authorities that we have on board. So for the moment, I think those are the two areas that I'll be able to, I want us to focus on: the advocacy campaigns on the authorities and public education to ensure that the public are aware that the information is supposed to be shared out there.
Thanks very much, Mule. If we have time, I would love to hear what you think the messaging in the advocacy campaigns should be. What do Kenyans need to hear? But before that, let's head over to Bernard Mugendi. He is a technologist who studies emerging technologies and data for social good. He's currently the digital rights lead at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Welcome, Bernard. When we talk about social good, I think elections is one of the key ways with which we can transform. The kind of leadership that we have, dictates how our public goods and services delivery and the social good that we want to see. So it's a really important period in a citizen's kind of life. And so as we look at the role of data and technology in this and the social good, I'm just thinking about the stakeholders. Mule mentioned that all stakeholders. So we have various stakeholders in this process. So we'd want maybe to hear from you, what is the role of, what roles can be played by stakeholders in this process, and what do you think their top 3 priorities should be? Karibu, Bernard.
Okay, thank you. I think the question of elections is something that is very interesting, and obviously when we're heading to an elections period, it's a question on everyone's it's a question on everyone's mind. And so I would just maybe link the priorities in 3 sections, and first to start with is I would like to talk about transparency in the election processes. I remember the Privacy International once said that there's a report by Privacy International in one of the reports that says that technology should reinforce trust in the elections and democratic processes and not undermine it. And so looking at transparency as a key issue in the upcoming elections, and in this context, the use of data and technology. So I think the different laws of stakeholders have a key role to play. And let us look at civil society, for instance. I'm glad that Mule has briefly talked about the role of election observers even during the elections period. But so, for instance, in that situation, I would like to just add that we have seen the evolution of technology, and and how technology has continuously been used, especially in the elections process. And therefore, the observation processes or civil society and other observers have a duty to also update the election monitoring or election observation methodologies to include aspects that, data and technology aspects, because initially initially it has just been about, what we're observing as elections, have there been instances of violence, have there been instances of malpractices during, during the elections period. But nowadays with data, I believe that those election observation missions and especially of civil society and other agencies that needs to incorporate and really look at the data, for instance. And then also in transparency, let us look at the election management bodies, and in this case, we're looking at IEBC. Transparency, to me, starts from the point of procurement, and I'm glad one of the panelists has highlighted this, because what we are seeing right now is a whole process that is infused with, so much. A process that has been infused with so much, secrecy, for lack of a better word. But ideally, for our credible elections, for our credible elections, IEBC needs to make these processes transparent so that it can to even increase credibility in the elections process. So, and this starts from procuring the biometric voter registration kits, all the way to registration of persons, or the registration of voters, and all the way to the election day. How is elections being carried out, the transmission process, and how is IEBC transparent to about its data processes and how its handling of data. And then the other two key issue or key consideration that I would talk about is the issue of data protection, because data protection is an issue that we can't abate during elections period. And why I'm talking about data protection is that we've seen in the previous elections how how that has been significant. I think it's Tevin who's talked about the role of Cambridge Analytica during the 2013 and 2017 general elections in Kenya. And so that brings me to one of the major stakeholders in this process. And let us look at maybe technology company and service providers, because we are heading to a period whereby there is so much data in terms of online and both offline. But if you look at the online context, there's going to be, most political parties are using, different methods of campaigns, trying to use, different data-driven targeting techniques in order to sort of gain, votes, or to sort of target their voters. And therefore, this is often marred with a lot of, false fake news and a lot of misinformation and a lot of disinformation, especially on social media. And therefore, how do these service providers, or how do the telecom providers, for instance, ensure that their platforms are not used to spread as a platform. Their platforms are not used to spread fake news, especially on elections. So, and then also this now brings me to the data office of the Data Protection Commissioner, because one of the things, this is the very first time that office is going to be interacting with the general public for in an elections context. So, what are the guidelines, for instance? It has set in place. So, what are the guidelines that exist, especially especially targeting the elections period now, because elections is just about a year away, and we know that there are different strategies or different ways that different candidates and different political parties have in place to ensure that they sustain their campaigns online. So, how do we make sure that that is done in an ethical manner? And then lastly, I would also like to look about the administration of the whole electoral process in an impartial, inclusive, and an accountable manner. And this
And this stems from Article 81 of the Constitution on the general principles of electoral systems, because oftentimes the elections is not just a one party, or it's not just a one body thing. It's a set of processes, and a sort of parties are involved. So, for instance, let us look at the judiciary, for instance. I'm looking at the judiciary, for instance, is because I think the judiciary has a role to play in conflict resolution, because we are looking at this from a point of we are trying to be proactive and not essentially reactive, so that how do we handle conflict, or how do we handle cases of conflict that arise during elections? How do we make sure that time, when that time comes, that the judiciary is well, it is well. How do we ensure that the judiciary is able to sustain that, and it is able to resolve these conflicts in an open and in a transparent manner? And then lastly, I would also like to look at the role of IEBC in bringing all these processes, in ensuring that the whole process remains credible, in ensuring that the whole process remains transparent, because right now, the whole idea is that elections means to remain free, fair, open, and transparent. So, and for IEBC to do that, it needs to there's need to demonstrate that. There's need for IEBC to demonstrate its ability to its ability to remain transparent, its ability to remain accountable, and its ability to remain inclusive. And therefore, and how does it do this while remaining independent? Because ideally, IEBC is supposed to be an independent body, and I think that is Chapter 1 of the Constitution. So how does IEBC remain independent, taking into consideration that how does IEBC remain independent, taking into consideration all these other governance and democratic processes that it needs to demonstrate? Because at the end of the day, the key to being transparent, the key to remaining transparent, or the key to demonstrating fairness and accountability is crucial, and I think one that we most Kenyans like myself are hoping to see. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much for that, Bernard, and an impassioned plea as well. I'd like to pick up on a really important point that you've raised, which is that trust is key to the integrity of the elections, and that technology, data have a role, and their management do have a role to play in all of this. And it is something that Kenyans care very much about. And so I would like to hear some thoughts from the panel on how they think, one or two thoughts on how data and technology around elections can build that trust, can be more transparent. Are we talking about open tech? How will it be more inclusive? We have a population that largely lives in rural areas, don't have access to certain elements of technology. Do we have low tech options? What is it that we need for tech to build trust through transparency, accountability, and making sure that all voices are heard and inclusive? I'll start with Mule, and then I'll move over to Fiona. So Mule, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, and thank you that's a very good question. I think for me, as a citizen election observer, I always go back to where the best of everything. Elections is about the people, and whatever technology, whatever system that must be used in pursuant to Article 86, which talks about a simple process. We have to ensure and demonstrate, I like Bernard's word, demonstrate that it's a simple process. So whatever technology that must be employed, however innovative that technology is, it must be deciphered in a manner that the local mwananchi must understand. And that's the reason why election technology in itself should never, ever be a very difficult thing. And all the systems that we're using should not be very complicated. Anything which is complicated becomes an opaque issue in an election, which ought to be transparent and which must infuse a level of public confidence if it is to become a credible election. We always say the biggest problem, even from an analog point of view, from the 2017 election, the biggest issue that we picked up, which was our number one recommendation, was to build public trust. And you do this by having a very robust public engagement process. IEBC must work for the people. It must ensure that whatever activities that it is undertaking, including the other election management bodies, such like the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, they must work for the people. And it is they are the ones who are beholden with the responsibility of ensuring that whatever is going to be used in an election process must be understandable to the people in the fringes of this country, the people who cannot be able to understand those complex things called KIMS and transmission of results and even issues around data privacy. They don't understand those things. It must be chilled down for them. So there must be a deliberate effort by the agencies which are given the responsibility to manage elections to ensure that everybody is aware and everybody follows the process. And the word, why I'm using the word to demonstrate is that even in the most simple relationships, and this is something that personally I've repeated very many times, even in terms of relationships, romantic relationships, how do you build trust when it is broken? What you do is that you must demonstrate, or a partner involved in the abuse of the trust must demonstrate henceforth, not going back, but henceforth that they are following the right script. And that is exactly what we must do in elections. So let IEBC deal with its part in terms of demonstrating that it is doing the right thing by unpacking what could be a complex process into a simple process. If the KIMS are too complicated, or the kind of technology which is going to be in place is too complicated, it must be, there must be conversing between different stakeholders. You can invite the private sector, you can invite the civil society organizations and others who have a level of knowledge in some of those technologies so that it is further unpacked. And that's why part of the issue that I discussed initially about public education comes in, because we want to engage the members of the public to understand the process of elections, because it's about them electing a leader. And there should be no opaqueness. There should be no black box. Technology tends to bring black boxes in elections. There should be no black box in that process of the elections. So from where observers stand, we need to retool for us to be able to pick up the right information so that our findings are informative to the members of the public. We need to ensure that the messaging, like you talked about earlier, is robust enough for the members of the public to be able to engage. And sometimes when we get ourselves into levels where the authorities are not following the script, or they're not really doing things according to the design of the law where public participation is espoused, then even public interest litigation is undertaken to ensure that then the law is followed in the manner and in the speak and the letter and the spirit that it has prescribed. So those would be my comments at the moment.
Thank you, Mule. And I think that analogy of a romantic relationship will stick with most of our listeners today. You breach the trust, the burden is on you to build it back and to demonstrate. And this is a call also to our public officials as well. Fiona, we'd want to hear on the same from you, what your thoughts are as we come to Mwenda after that. So Fiona, how do you think, what are some best practices that you can share with us in terms of tech and building trust?
Thank you so much. I think I'll just pick on from where Sao has left off. He's mentioned towards the end about technology creating a black box, but I think the black box is perceived in the mind because there are things that we need to be cognizant of. the way we've run our elections in this country, and I hope that that was going to change this year because it has an impact on how the technology is, what technology is used, how it can be used, and how effective it can be, as well as whether or not the general public is able to buy in and trust the use of technology. When you have a system that starts off with a digital registration process, so you have your ID, you go, you register, it's biometric, that everything is smooth, digital, the works. You go in for the election day, it is the biometric data that they are checking. So they check with your fingerprint, they get your data, you're cleared, you go and vote. You go to vote, it is a manual paper. You're going through a manual process. So everything now goes manual. You cast your vote manually. Then at the ward level, there's manual counting of the ballots. Then those results get reported to the next level of center through a digital platform, where now the digital tallying begins. Then we're expecting the digital reports of the tallying at the higher levels to begin to happen. Once you begin a process and you start bringing in the human elements, we need to be cognizant of the fact that in technology, when the human element comes in, there are two aspects that come into play. One is the skills. So of course, the skills and knowledge and awareness and everything Musau has mentioned, that the public need to know that every stakeholder going through the process needs to understand about the technology become important. Then with all that and all that awareness that is created, there is a very important part of technology that is the value system. Unfortunately, even in the normal IT space, in a business environment, we've gone through a session earlier on cybersecurity. It is the value systems we have in our society, the value systems that we have in our business environments that we transfer onto the technological platforms. So we basically take our value system and start putting it into the technology framework of where we have any human interaction. And that begins to defeat the purpose and the ability of technology to deliver. Because when we bring in our value system, we are bringing in a lot of issues that now affect the trust, that create a perceived black box because of technology. Even things that are clear and straightforward suddenly start being described as things from another world that we even as technology experts sit back and are wondering, are we talking about the same technology? It sounds like something from out of this world that has been innovated specifically for Kenya, and you'll never know that these systems have ever been used in any other country that exists in this world. It's like a new technology created in mass. Why? Because our human value systems come and start taking charge of our interests and what we want to see out of the electoral process, and we begin to influence using all levels of influencers that we can reach to create confusion or misunderstanding and misinformation to the general public on what the technology can really do. So by the time we get to the voting day, we don't seem to be clear to understand what this technology can do. But there's nothing new. When you sit down with the technical team at IEBC and technical experts, the technology is not foreign. There is nothing new in that technology that has never been tried or used anywhere else before. But because of the element of our value system as human beings and our priorities, our wants, our likes, our desires, and how we want to manipulate the processes and the system, so we transfer those values into the technology platform that has been acquired to serve the nation, putting all national interests aside. And that is what, the truth of the matter is that is what affects our ability to use technology. And it affects us even in the education system, even in look at a hospital, for example, and they have to use a technology system. If the staff have a culture of using their positions to override the system and to do other things with the data they collect, we'll have the data breaches. We will have the system not performing as it should. We'll still have a simple thing like a queuing system not happening because there are people who can override the queue and skip the queue, even in a banking hall. So look at our value system, and I think as Kenyans, we need to be honest with ourselves and look at our value system and begin to ask ourselves as we go into using technology for different functions, in this case for elections, at what point do we draw the line between individual values and national values? Because if national values take precedence, we will be able to incorporate a value system into the election process that supports the technology that has been procured to support the systems. And we will clear all the black boxes. Everything will be easy to understand, straightforward to the public, to everybody, every stakeholder to participate, and we will be able to now get the results of that elections as they are supposed to come out. And so trust, I think, boils down, for me, from where I sit as a technical community, I think it boils down to how we, the human beings getting involved in the process, use the technology. You put garbage into a computer, you will not expect good results. It's normally we are taught garbage in, garbage out. So what are we putting into this system? Both in terms of the technology infrastructure, the skills, and the values. Those three must come into play for us to have a technology system that can build trust and support the election process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fiona. You raise a really critical point that tech must operate in an enabling environment for it to do the work that it needs to do. And very sadly, that values which should ordinarily be a positive thing, like inclusion and all those things, have actually become degenerated by things like values of impunity and so forth, that then affect how technology is created, how it's used, and what it's used to achieve. That's a really important consideration at this time. I think from Wenda, I would want to come to you on the issue of trust and data. There was a social media flurry a few weeks ago about people finding out they're in political parties that they never signed up for, and their data was available to them. It was being moved up and down. What can we do about data management to build trust for the upcoming elections? And do we have time for these measures to be put in place?
For the Data Protection Act. And so for now, they need to, when the elections are coming up, they need to ensure that they're training people. And that's also the officials themselves. You see, because you may train the public, but if the officials don't value the data, we'll see what we're going to do. So for now, people just finding they've been registered to come back to political parties they didn't sign up for. Another thing is, even us as the voters, it's the onus on us to call out data misuse. As we saw with the recent scandal of the political illegal registration, a number of people actually went and complained to the ODPC. And they were like, okay, so I found myself registered to this. So the question that is being asked now is, what actions has the ODPC taken? And one of those ones that I remember at the time we were meeting with them, they said this, they should start meeting with the election officials to discuss with them that now there's a Data Protection Act and that they need to comply with these things. Another thing they can do is have guidelines. And I remember Mr. Musa had indicated that, have data protection guidelines. For example, by now, as expected, by the time I go to the IEBC website, there's a policy notice on how they deal with registration of voters in terms of how they're dealing with that data and the rights that I have. Because the Data Protection Act requires them to do that. So by the time they start next month's mass registration, it should be expected by now that they have that notice in place, and that whoever is going to register is explained to in a manner that they understand, in a simple manner that they understand. This is how we are using your data, and we are going to use it for this purpose. We are going to store it for this purpose. This is where we are taking it. It's those simple things that generate trust in terms of using technology and data. When it comes to political parties, we can borrow a leaf from the UK, where the Information Commission Officer, that is the equivalent of the ODPC, issued guidelines on how political parties use data, in terms of how they use data for advertising. It's those things that when you share now with political parties, they start knowing, oh, by the way, this year or next year's elections, things won't be, we just go to the IEBC, collect the data we want, and we just send messages as we want. So those are the simple things that we can start doing between now and the elections that I think can work. Or even something like when it comes to matters of cybersecurity. I remember like the US after the whole saga of what happened with the claims that the elections were meddled with, they issued simple guidelines to each officials on how to handle cybersecurity incidences. So like in Kenya, for example, in case the cybersecurity incident, like the voter registration system has been compromised in an election center, the people at the election center should be equipped with enough simple registrations to kind of deal with the issues that arise there. So those are the simple things I think we can do that can create. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those responses. We'd now like to get some feedback from those listening into the session and their questions for the panelists. So to do that, we will start off with a question from Daudi Were, and he wants to know, his statement is that IEBC Elections Operations Plan for 2022 talks about upgrade to both KIEMS and BVR system to accommodate additional voters. Do the panelists have confidence in those two systems to be able to handle voter data? Who would like to answer Daudi on that one? Fiona, you're on mute. I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you. And then we can go to Mula.
I was going to give it a shot. My understanding of integrated management systems is that, for example, the Kenya integrated election management system would have certain facets to it. And of these facets, one of the facets would be the process of voter registration that would include the biometric voter registration systems. And assuming, I've not read the document, so I'm not going to assume that I know what it is. However, I'm basing this on my general knowledge of how systems work. So when you have an integrated system to manage particular activities, it has several modules, that's what we call them, or facets. And those facets look at different stages of the process that you want to have an integrated system for. If it is the election system, for example, there's processes there that look at the registration of the voters. Remember I said the registration part normally is digital because they use the BVRs, they collect your biometric data, they do everything digitally, which works very well. Then you can have a digital voting system or a manual voting system. In our case, in the past, we have had a manual voting system. I haven't read the document to confirm whether we are going to move on to a digital voting system, because if that happens, that changes the space totally. Then we've got the tallying and or counting system that can be manual or digital, but most of the times when you have manual voting, you're going to end up with a manual tallying of the votes. So at that point in time, then the level to which we are now saying we have an integrated election management system begins to raise questions, because to what extent are we using the technology? It's very limited. Most of the processes are manual. So I would need to ask maybe or check with IEBC to know if this integrated election management system is end-to-end, and what modules are they taking on that will automate the process of elections, and which ones are we going to have to handle manually. Like I said, we have a value system that is a bit of a challenge, and because of the value system, the technology we use has been used in other parts of the world. But because other places have different culture and different values, it works differently for them in comparison to how it works for us. That said and done, I will say the system will be as good as we, as Kenyans employed, especially those in IEBC employed and who have the responsibility of managing the system, will work with it and make it work for us.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for that emphasis. Just a moment. I think Mule had wanted to say something, and then we come to Mwendwa. Okay. If I can give you half a minute each, please, because I would really like to hear, as we wind up, a 30-second call to action from each of you. So Mule and then Mwendwa, please.
Okay. I'll be very brief. But first, allow me to counter something that Fiona has said. And I agree with her on the value system. I just want to say that the elections are the people's election. Is the people's problem. IEBC must present a solution to the people of Kenya, not the people of Cuba, not the people of Uganda. Give us a system that works for these doubting people. If we doubt, that's our culture. Put a system that allows them to work. Two, on the question of the systems, the Kenyans they integrate three, I think, processes: registration, identification, and transmission. Any change, any enhancement to that may further complicate the process. And I think Fiona has talked about that in respect to whether we would want to go to a level of even e-voting. I think that's a tall order at the moment. We would want to see a system which first becomes easy enough, understood by the people of the country before we can be able to have any other enhancements, unless the enhancement is only in respect of those three processes that we are talking about. And then lastly, for any system to be admissible for use in this country, I still go back to the question of public engagement, that whatever enhancement, whatever changes, it must be interrogated through a public participation and engagement process, which also includes likes of experts like the.
So it was built as one of the key ways of resolving the issues you always have in technology. But as Fiona alludes to, maybe what the problem you're having is now the issue of a value system. That yes, we have deployed technology, but have we addressed the value system? Also, if you look at our EPA, the way it's designed, actually, if properly implemented, can actually go a long way in increasing the transparency of how these systems are used even in the elections. So I think we should start asking ourselves, why are we using this technology? And where are we coming from when you're coming to technology?
Thank you. Thank you so much. The hashtag is, Bernard, I'm coming to you for a call to action, so you can add your comments there. The hashtag is KEIGF 2021. We would love to hear your responses to the discussions and your thoughts on what should happen to improve the technology around elections, your data collection, and improve the integrity of the elections by building trust. Bernard, your final comments along with a 30-second call to action going ahead.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to add one last comment to Daudi's question, and I would like to the question of assessment. In every setup or in every organization, the aspect of upgrade is usually based on a certain decision. So one of the things that IEBC needs to come out and publicly share is was an assessment done in terms of the challenges that we have previously experienced with the electoral system that in the previous election, and what is this new upgrade that these kids, what is a major what is a major improvement that this system is going to change, and does this new system fix the existing challenges we've had previous challenges in terms of access to information? For instance, we saw that in the previous elections, when IEBC was actually failed to provide information at the Supreme Court. So just that aspect of IEBC needs to come out and just share the general assessment that was done before this upgrade was done, because this is one of the ways to instill confidence. This is one of the ways to instill trust to not just the voters but to also the major public in terms of transparency in the election process. And lastly, just to finalize, I would just like to finish with the words that technology is electoral technology and data is crucial to the outcome of any election. Therefore, for the upcoming general elections, the ability of the electoral system's ability to demonstrate transparency and the electoral system's ability to demonstrate transparency and inclusivity and accountability is going to be key, is going to be a key determinant towards the outcome of the election. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those final thoughts. That brings us to the end, so we won't have a chance to hear the call to action, but I encourage our panelists to get online using the hashtag KEIGF2021 and do share your call to action. Thank you for being with us for this session. We have a great session coming up, so please stay with us. We're going to hear a short word from our sponsors, and we'll begin the next session. So thank you very much to our panelists for your great inputs, for your time. We very much appreciate it. Do enjoy the rest of the IGF. Asanteni.